Hello again everybody, hope you're all doing well. So we're going to go for a nice little ride down a very snowy road in a minute, but before we do I just thought whilst I'm in the warmth of the garage we'll go over a few quick things and I'll just talk you around what I do and things like that. So obviously it's been snowing quite a bit in Europe for the last week or so. Actually here in the region of Czech that I live in we generally get snow this time of year anyway, so it's not unusual for us. But they don't salt the roads around this village. In fact, they don't salt them around any of the villages around here. I think it's due to the fact that we're in a nature conservation area. So once you get into the towns, obviously the roads are treated and salted, but around here they're just not. So obviously when you go out, you're riding on snow, where there's no getting around it. So obviously, ideally, if you're going to go out in those conditions, you take the car or something like that. But being a little bit mental, I'm going to take the bike. Now, obviously, depending on what kind of bike you have, will dictate how much success you have. If you've got a sports bike, it's probably not going to be quite as good as, say, something like this. This, obviously, being a Suzuki Van, relatively low powered, big, fat, chunky wheels and tyres. Slightly more off-roady orientated tyres on my particular one as well, which is quite helpful. So setting up the bike, I have done nothing. I know some people will argue about reducing tyre pressures and things like that. I'm not doing that. Two reasons I'm not doing that. The first is that these tyres, factory pressure is 18 psi, which is quite squishy anyway. And the second reason is a little bit more complicated, involves a bit of science, and I'm not going to bother talking about it in this video. I'm actually going to do a separate video a bit later on explaining that. But for those of you out there wondering why I'm not reducing my tyre pressures, they're pretty low anyway, and for reasons I shall explain later. So the bike, I'm doing nothing to. Myself, obviously, I'm going to be wrapped up nice and warm, because if you're cold, the first thing your body's going to do is stiffen up and become less fluid movement-wise, which is going to be a bit of a pain, because when you're out there, when you're riding in snow and ice, when the bike starts to slip around, you need to be nice and fluid in your movements in order to try and counteract that and try and keep the bike upright. As soon as you start stiffening up and becoming less or becoming more rigid, that's when you start getting into trouble. On that point, if you're not used to the bike slipping around underneath you, your body's first reaction will also probably be to tense up, so you do kind of need to remind yourself to keep relaxed the whole time you're riding. Aim of the game here is just to get from point A to point B without falling over. Now, you could have the best bike in the world. For the conditions, you could be the most skilled rider in the world, and there's still a chance. It might only be a small chance if you're particularly skilled, but there is still a chance you might fall over. So, you've got to be prepared for that. Take it slow, so if you do fall over, it's not such a big deal. Obviously, advantage of this bike is centre of gravity is fairly low. It's got a bit of ground clearance, which is good, but it's got a nice low centre of gravity. It's also quite light, so if I do fall over, it's a really easy bike to pick up. If you've got a big heavy adventure bike or something and you fall over, it can be a bit more of a pain trying to get the thing back upright, especially if it's slippery, because you might not be able to get a grip with your shoes and things like that. So that's just things to bear in mind. Now obviously once we get out there, once we're riding, I say the main thing is just to remain as relaxed as possible. Take it slowly. Generally ride in a higher gear than you normally would. So if you're normally riding down the road at a given speed in third gear, you might want to do it in fourth gear. The idea being that in a higher gear, if you do accidentally roll on the throttle a bit hard or something like that, it's going to be a bit slower responding, so it's not going to spin up the back wheel and start skidding around underneath you. The next thing is not to do two things at once. So whereas in normal conditions you might be confident and happy to brake a little bit around corners, or trail braking as it's called, obviously in these conditions that's just going to skid the back end out. So you're going to want to brake in a straight line, nice and gradually, and then make the turns separately rather than doing two things at once. These are kind of common sense things really, but it's just things to bear in mind. then beyond that, the main thing is just to pick your path. So once we get out on the road, you'll see that there'll be two different types of snow. There'll be the sort of soft snow that's just lain, and there'll be compacted stuff. Now, the compacted stuff obviously is where cars have already been over it several times. It's basically like ice, so that's going to be pretty slippery stuff. So as much as possible, it's good to avoid where other vehicles' tyres have already been and try and ride in the soft stuff as much as possible. But ultimately, the main thing is just taking it slowly. As tempting as it is to try and get from A to B as fast as possible, it's just not going to happen. At least you're not going to stay upright for very long. The idea is just to, as I say, get from point A to point B without falling over, if at all possible. So, now, funny story, I did actually do this a couple of years back. I can't remember when it was, 2010 I think it was, back in England. We had a fair bit of snow, and I did actually ride all the way from Aylsham, where I was at the time, to Canterbury on a Vespa 250, which had small wheels, summer tyres, all that kind of stuff. Basically, the complete opposite to this. It was not suited for the conditions at all. I think I dropped that thing probably 5 times on the way and probably had an average speed of about 3 miles an hour, but I did make it. So on this bike, it's obviously going to be a lot better. Much bigger wheels, much more grip, much more suited to the situation. But that's just to give you a sort of example of, how some bikes, it's possible. I mean, technically any bike it's possible to do it on, but yeah, you'll have varying degrees of success depending on what kind of vehicle you own. If you've got something like a dirt bike or something like this, you're going to be a bit more successful than a scooter with smaller wheels and things like that. But as I say, that's not to say it's not possible. That's just giving you guys a realistic idea of what you're dealing with depending on what you own. So I'm going to chuck my gear on and then we'll go for a little ride, and as I say, you'll sort of see what I mean. Okay guys, so here we are out on the road. So I've actually come to the opposite end of the road. This is actually the main road into Politzer, so you can see this has been treated. But this is like the beginning of the road that goes back to my village, and this is what all the roads around my village and between the villages look like. So yeah, we're going to go for a little ride down it. Now I should point out I'm not the most skilled rider in the world. I'm not bad, but I'm not like a pro or anything. Actually, I've got a few coordination issues that mean that I could never really be the most skilled rider in the world, but that does mean that if I can get down this relatively safely and everything else, then pretty much anyone can. So here we go. So as I say, the aim of the game here is not to go fast. It's simply to get from A to B and stay upright. So the main aim of the game really is slowly catchy monkey. So especially as we're going around corners, we're not going to be going mad on the throttle. We're going to be taking it nice and slow, nice and steady, keeping a constant eye on the terrain in front of us, especially things like the camber of the road, because obviously towards the edges of the road where it sort of slopes slightly down into the sides, that's where you can end up sliding down and obviously falling off. So you want to keep relatively close to the centre really, apart from when there's oncoming vehicles. We're going along, my speedo's in kilometres an hour, so we're going very slowly. We're going about 15, 18 kilometres an hour. But as I say, I'm not necessarily the most skilled rider in the world, and the aim is to get there in one piece. So yeah, we're in a relatively high gear for the speed that we're going. You see there's a lot of compacted snow around. I'm trying to avoid it, but in some places the whole lot of it's compacted just because cars have already been over it. Now there are some sections of this road where, because I did say before that it's best to avoid other cars' tracks, but there are some sections of this road where the cars have managed to wear the snow down to the road surface. So in those sort of instances, it's better to be in those tracks. The thing is just to use your judgment really, and you know, go slow enough that you can judge the road ahead and decide which bit of the road is going to be the best to ride in. You know, as I say, we're going very, very slowly, but we're getting there, and you know, it's beautiful scenery as well. I mean, you know, sometimes it's nice to go real slow and just enjoy the scenery around. And as I say, depending on what kind of bike you have, depending on your setup, and depending on your level of skill and confidence, you might be able to go a little bit faster. But generally, slow is key in these conditions. I'll say this bike as well is very well suited to this. These big, fat, low-pressure tyres are ideal, really, because they just mean that we're poodling along, no dramas. It's actually nice and easy, quite relaxed. As I say, that's the key, is remaining relaxed, because as I said before, if the back end does start to slide around or whatever, you need nice fluid movement in your body so that you can adjust your weight, adjust the steering, just to counteract the slide, because if you stiffen up, you're likely just to go off and fall over. Especially going around these corners and stuff, we're just slowing down that little bit more, just to keep it nice and safe. As I say, there's always still the chance you might fall over anyway. And this is the other thing, like when you get oncoming cars, just slow right down, sometimes come to a complete stop if you need to. Just never worth taking any risks, because you never know what the bike's going to do, you never know what the next fit road surface is going to be like, so it's best not to risk it. Yeah, see, just a little wobble there. Right, I'm actually going to go down here towards the high street. You see what I mean? Like, coming out of my house especially, there's nowhere you can go where the roads aren't like this, so you have no choice but to ride on this kind of road. But as I say, as long as you're careful, it's fine and actually quite pleasurable. Yeah, the village stray dog is on his daily walk. I don't know who this dog actually belongs to, but he's always on a little walk somewhere. Come on, fella, out of the way. There's a good boy. Just realised I left my indicator on. Terrible. Okay, let's go in here. Okay guys, so there we go, we have successfully navigated a few very snowy lanes. Yeah, see, this is the high street, this is what I'm talking about, this is what the high street looks like. This is the main road through the village, so yeah. Yeah, so there you go guys, as I say, it's just a short little video, just sort of riding down on some nice snowy lanes, and showing you guys that it can be done relatively safely. You just have to, as I say, take it real slow. So yeah, there you go guys, hopefully you enjoyed this little video. If you did, please do give it a like. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, go check out my other videos, and for now, I'll catch you again soon.